All right, so hi everyone. On behalf of the Skills for California Network, powered by the National Skills Coalition and the California Edge Coalition, we would like to welcome you to our Promoting Digital Inclusion for All California Workers webinar. I am India Hextall, Policy Analyst at the National Skills Coalition, and thank you for taking the time to join us today. I would like to take a moment to go over a few housekeeping items before we get started. First, you can join us on Twitter using the hashtag Skills for California. California Edge Coalition and the National Skills Coalition will be live tweeting during this webinar, and we encourage everyone to share their highlights and key takeaways. We will also be having a live Q&A session towards the end, so please be sure to put your questions in the chat, and I will be moderating the chat throughout the webinar, and we'll be sharing some additional resources there as well. And finally, this webinar will be recorded and posted on our Skills for California website, so please feel free to share the recording with your colleagues afterwards. So let's go ahead and hop right into it. Today's conversation will be moderated by Amanda Bergson-Shilcock, a senior fellow at the National Skills Coalition, and she is joined today by our esteemed panelists, Rebecca Kauma, Economic and Digital Inclusion Program Manager at the City of Long Beach, Louise Sandoval, Executive Director at Building Skills Partnership, and Trish Kelly, Managing Director at Valley Vision. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to Amanda to get us started.
Thanks so much, India. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you today, and thanks to all of you for joining us. We've designed today's conversation to bring you a small snapshot of the expertise that our three terrific panelists have. They could all talk about all aspects of these issues, but we've asked them to focus on one particular piece for each of them. So when we think about digital inclusion, we're really thinking about three legs of a stool: broadband access, up-to-date digital device access, and digital skills. And folks really need all three of those skills to be able to engage successfully as workers, as business owners, as parents, as civic citizens, as full participants in our society. And so we've asked each of our panelists today to focus on one of those three legs of the stool. So you'll be hearing from Trish Kelly of Valley Vision around some really important legislation that's pending around broadband access. And she'll walk you through some key bills to be aware of and sort of the context for the broadband component of the discussion. Then you'll hear from Rebecca Kauma, the Economic and Digital Inclusion Program Manager at the City of Long Beach, as India mentioned. Long Beach was pretty early out of the gate in creatively using CARES Act funding that Congress passed last March to support digital inclusion. We've asked Rebecca to focus in particular on the devices aspect. How do we make sure that people have access to the digital devices they need to do what they need to do? And then finally, you'll hear from Louise Sandoval of Building Skills Partnership. BSP is a nationally recognized nonprofit that works with immigrant janitors and other building services workers to help them build the technical, industry-specific, and English language skills they need to succeed in their jobs and to be able to grow in their careers. BSP has really been at the forefront of trying to think through how to make sure that people are building digital skills so that they can respond to, for example, mobile app requests for property services and other kinds of things that might not have been such a big deal before COVID, but are part of everybody's world now. Once we hear from each of these three terrific presenters, then we'll have a nice chunk of time for questions and answers. So please sit back and enjoy. I'm going to turn things over to Trish now, and she's going to walk you through some really robust information she has to share. Each of our presenters has about 8 minutes for their portion of the presentation, then we'll have a good 15, 20 minutes for questions. So Trish, I'm going to ask you to unmute and we'll go over.
Thank you so much, Amanda, and thanks to the National Skills Coalition and the California Edge Coalition. It's really a great pleasure to be here today and share our information and learn more from everybody. We are a nonprofit civic regional leadership organization based in Sacramento, the capital region, but we work with statewide and regional networks. Next slide, please, Amanda. We manage the Connected Capital Area Broadband Consortium, which is funded by the California Public Utilities Commission. We're one of a network of about 12 consortia statewide. The mission created by legislation was to connect unserved households as identified by the PUC with the minimum goal of connecting 98% of households in the region. So we're a very blended region with urban and rural and suburban, and we have more than 35,000 unserved households. And we do a lot of speed testing and validating too with the PUC to really ground truth test our data. And we work with providers to try to get infrastructure projects so that we do have the connectivity for broadband access and adoption. And we really focus on our rural areas, but COVID has showed us we need to really focus on our underserved urban areas as well. Just a couple of other things to mention. We take a holistic approach to dealing with the issue of digital access and digital divide. So we've embedded the priority for broadband connectivity and digital skills within our regional prosperity strategy. And that includes our partnership with state agencies such as Caltrans and the Broadband Council, linking infrastructure for transportation with broadband. We manage the Coalition for Digital Inclusion in our region, which is a partnership with the City of Sacramento, the library, our community college, Los Rios, and Sac State, and many, many other partners and to really address the kind of things that Luis and Rebecca will be talking about. We also do resource and policy guides. We just finished a best practices guide for local government on policies and ordinances to expedite infrastructure investment. And so we are going to have a webinar about that, and coming up on May 14th. Love to have you join us for that. It's a multi-pronged approach working with the California Emerging Technology Fund and California Forward. We also work with our workforce boards and colleges on future of work projects. So the digital literacy and skills piece is very important there. But all of this work leads us to why we work in the policy domain to help drive progress. So we work with California Forward. We're a co-lead on the Broadband for All work group. And we work with our local Metro Chamber of Commerce on their Connected Capital Region initiative and really promote broadband access and adoption. So next slide, please. What we're doing now is we're working with our partners on tracking and sometimes advocating and testifying for proposed state legislation. So it's been a long slog. The last year we almost got there, but the process didn't quite make it. But this year, because of the impacts of the pandemic, obviously, and the fact that we're facing a digital cliff, it's a huge focus of legislation this year. So we have 24 bills or more in the Assembly and the Senate at the state level that are dealing with many different aspects of broadband. So a lot of the focus has been on the funding from the California Public Utilities Commission, which is how the regional consortia are also funded, that provides funding for infrastructure and really to connect those underserved or unserved households. So there's also proposals for bond funding, permit streamlining to, again, remove barriers for investment, affordable internet programs, and other aspects like health, education, distance learning. So right now, hearings are underway. The bills so far are moving forward. We know that there will be some amendments through the process, but by and large, there's a lot of concurrence and support across the region. So we're really hoping that we can have a package of legislation, and we know that it's supported by the leadership of the legislature and the governor's office and many other key stakeholders to align proposals and investments. There's also been discussion of the possibility of a one-time state general fund investment, and a lot of discussion about how we can leverage the state investment to align with the coming federal investments. I will go through a couple of the bills, but I do encourage everybody to come on and support because we need a big push to get over the finish line. Next slide, please. So a couple of the core bills are SB 4 from Senator Gonzalez and AB 14 from Assembly Member Aguiar Curry. So these bills will be joined. The two legislators are working very closely together. They're both dealing with core issues around the California Advanced Services Fund through the Public Utility Commission. One reason this is a high priority is because we were supposed to be connecting all of our 98% of our households in the regions by 2022. We're a long way from that. The fund is oversubscribed. So we need continued funding mechanism. And this mechanism will allow the continuation of, it's a surcharge on your phone bill. It's a minimal, it's like 35 or 40 cents, 25 cents, whatever. It depends on your bill, but it's very minimal. And yet it creates a fund that providers can then apply for that subsidizes infrastructure investment to our underserved and unserved areas. So these two bills create the continuation of the funding mechanism, including a bond financing securitization account so we can borrow against that for future revenues. But we also are really looking to future-proof infrastructure and create more eligibility for local governments and other partners. So there are a lot of reforms embedded in the bills. They will have some amendments, but this is really an important current tool that helps us meet our needs for connectivity. So next slide, please. I will say on some of the bills, there's a discussion about fees versus surcharges, and this is an existing fund, just to note, on the PUC. And we really want to work, especially with our rural legislators who have the most to benefit from that this is really an important piece of work to advance. Some of the other bills that are really in the mix here are AB 34 from Assemblymember Marisucci that would put a $10 billion general obligation bond on the ballot for 2022. And that would really be for use by public agencies for municipal connectivity and connectivity for partners. So we're really trying to expand the field of opportunity here. Parallel to that, AB 41 by Assemblymember Wood, and there's some other bills around expediting infrastructure projects or doing policies for things like microtrenching. It's really to work on the barrier side of policies and ordinances so that we can, again, expedite employment and leverage joint use projects with state infrastructure such as Caltrans highway projects. There's some other bills by Assemblymember Garcia and Gibson. Some of these bills are being heard today about establishing funds to connect residents to high-speed home internet. So that addresses the affordability issue. That's why a lot of people are locked out. And then also to support public housing. We have some public housing members we're working with. Up to 40% of households do not have internet connectivity. So even if students get devices, they can't do schoolwork, residents can't connect for other kinds of issues like employment, et cetera. SB 28 by Assemblymember Caballero it's to do with franchise reform, but also, again, deploy state assets. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned, we are really hoping to move these bills forward. We'll be working to report out on the bills, and we're working with California Forward and California Emerging Technology Fund to help get resources into communities to implement for broadband access and adoption. I just wanted to quickly note what drove our initiatives in our region is that in 2017 and 18, we had an assessment from the Brookings Institution on where our region stood compared to other regions. Digitalization of skills came up as a critical issue for us. We were lagging other regions, and jobs increasingly need more digital skills, but also our residents, especially our minority youth, were falling behind with skills. So that really catalyzed us to focus on digital skills and adoption. So next slide, just about finished. And we do a lot of research with our Center of Excellence and with our workforce boards on trying to understand the jobs at risk for automation and what digital skills we need. And then that's why we focus on access and adoption, so people have access to the tools and the connectivity so that they can build their literacy and skills. So that is kind of the quick overview of the work that we're doing. I do want to acknowledge our workforce boards have just made a regional planning grant to us to expand the work for our digital Sacramento Coalition for Digital Inclusion. So we're really proud to have the partnership with so many different leaders in our community. So thank you very much for the opportunity, Amanda.
Thanks so much, Trish. And I hope that you all took away from that two big messages. We didn't want you to memorize the specifics of each different bill that Trish talked about. We want you to understand that California is moving on a number of fronts now to address digital inclusion and broadband in particular, and that Trish and Valley Vision are a key source of expertise in being able to understand where are your opportunities to weigh in as an advocate. Now we're going to turn to Rebecca. As I mentioned, the city of Long Beach has been really a leader in thinking creatively about how to use federal funding to support digital inclusion. And she's going to talk in particular about the digital devices piece of it. This is actually Trish's last slide, which I think is a great transition slide here. There is no normal to go back to. What we ought to be doing is thinking about how we deal with transformational change. So we hope that's some of what you're getting from today. Rebecca, take it away.
Thank you so much, Amanda, and it's definitely a pleasure to learn from my other colleagues as well. So again, my name is Rebecca Coleman. I'm the Economic and Digital Inclusion Program Manager for the City of Long Beach, and I'm actually calling in from Los Angeles. So I work in Long Beach, but live in the Los Angeles County area, and I'm just super excited to be able to share a little bit more about what we've been doing in our digital inclusion efforts. So next slide, please. So first, I want to talk a little bit more about our digital inclusion initiative. And as Trisha mentioned, I just want to give a big shout out to Senator Lena Gonzalez, because all of her hard work with the city of Long Beach, she's actually the former councilwoman and is actually the primary leader that really was able to take off and really advance digital inclusion, and hence my role in the city of Long Beach. So thank you so much to her and her team, because her efforts truly allowed us to advance this work. So to talk a little bit more about how we view digital inclusion in the city of Long Beach, our vision statement, and this is actually a statement that we co-developed with our Digital Inclusion Stakeholder Committee, who is helping us create our digital inclusion roadmap. So we believe that every individual in Long Beach, regardless of background, identity, neighborhood, has high quality, accessible technology resources and services to be civically engaged and socially and economically empowered. And the two words that I want to uplift in here is identity and background, because we understand that there are so many different inequities that exist in digital inclusion, and that by your background and also by your identity, that also determines whether or not you have equitable access to digital inclusion resources and services. So for us in the city of Long Beach, we've been able to identify that our Black and Brown communities, our low-income communities, and older adults are significantly disproportionately affected by the digital divide. And it's important for us to apply an equity lens and to advance digital inclusion through collective impact. Next slide, please. And so similar to the presentation that you guys are seeing here, we uplift the entire spectrum of digital inclusion as part of our initiative. So we understand that in order for people to fully participate in digital inclusion, they need to have access to free multilingual computer literacy training. And we do emphasize multilingual because we understand that many people speak another language other than English inside of their household. So how are we providing resources that everyone in Long Beach are able to take advantage of, regardless of whether English is their first language or not? Also making sure that we're providing low cost and free high-speed quality internet services in the home, and also ensuring that we're uplifting low cost and free quality internet able technology devices, whether that's a desktop, a laptop, or a tablet. Next slide, please. And next, I'm going to go ahead and talk a little bit more about our implementation efforts for CARES Act. So the city of Long Beach was very fortunate enough to receive CARES Act funding. And for those of you guys who aren't familiar with CARES Act, the full name is the Coronavirus Aid, Relief, and Economic Security Act. And this was something that was passed by Congress and signed into law about a year ago. And through that, different state and local government entities were able to receive funding, and through that funding provide direct economic assistance for American workers, small businesses, and just anyone who needs some type of aid during the pandemic. And through that, the city of Long Beach was able to receive $40 million as part of that funding. And we went through an intensive process to figure out what types of efforts we should be funding. And digital inclusion was seen as a high priority, so they were able to allocate $1 million to that. Next slide. So one of the most important things as part of CARES Act was identifying which community members were most in need. And as I mentioned, we have seen that our low-income communities, our Black and Brown communities, and other communities of color are disproportionately affected by digital divide. But we also understand that there's also intersections between other identities as well. So we've seen that small business owners have been affected, students, parents, people who may be unemployed. So for us, we wanted to uplift all of these different communities and ensure that they had equitable access to resources and services. Next slide. And next, I'm going to talk about one of our most popular programs that we implemented as part of CARES Act. So our free internet and computing devices distribution. And the one thing that I want to mention as well is the approach that we took to this. So the city of Long Beach strongly values equity, and that is something that is at the essence of all of our digital inclusion work. And for those of you guys who may be new to the space of equity, we also look at it from a racial equity standpoint. So we believe that no matter based on your background and identity, that everyone should have equitable access to digital inclusion resources and services. And also understanding that race should not be used as an indicator to be able to have equitable outcomes. So for us, we ensure that we're applying an equity lens. So we disaggregate data. We also uplift community members that are most in need. We partner with community-based organizations. So all of that is the essence of our work. And that is essentially how we structure this particular program here. So as part of our efforts, we are in the process of creating a digital inclusion roadmap. And we found that most of the feedback that we received is that many people do have access to low-cost resources, but they still cannot afford it. So many of our Long Beach residents are benefiting from low-cost internet from an internet service provider, but because of the pandemic, that burden was still too much for them to be able to pay each month, whether it's $10 or as high as $25. So through this particular program, and we partnered with our Long Beach Housing Authority, our public library, and Human IT, and also several other community-based organizations, and we were able to establish a program that was able to provide free resources and free digital inclusion resources to Long Beach residents who are most in need. So what this encompassed was free hotspots, which came with a 1-year internet service plans, and then computing devices, so a tablet or a Chromebook. And we administered this on a first come, first served basis to qualified Long Beach residents. So this was something that we launched in partnership with our Long Beach Public Library. And through that, they were able to administer these devices through a competitive application process. And as part of our efforts, we were able to collectively administer close to 1,100 hotspots and then also close to 1,600 computing devices. And if you look at the next slide, as I mentioned, making sure that race is incorporated into this is very key. Through our efforts in ensuring that we were partnering with local community-based organizations, we were able to administer these free hotspots and computing devices to over 90% of communities of color in the city of Long Beach. And that's very, very significant because we understand that those are the individuals that are significantly impacted. And this included Black/African-American residents, our Latinx residents, our Asian/Cambodian residents, and then mixed residents as well. And then on the next slide, you'll also be able to see that disaggregating by zip code was also key. So in Long Beach, West Long Beach, North Long Beach, and Central are significantly impacted by the digital divide. So it was imperative that individuals that live in zip codes that are impacted had access, and through our outreach and our partnership with our community-based organizations, we were able to reach zip codes that are significantly affected by digital divide. Next slide. And I did want to show some photos and also reiterate some of the important takeaways that we learned from this process. the biggest thing that was a wake-up call for us is the need is greater even outside of Long Beach. And I'm super excited that Trisha and other entities are working on this from a regional / statewide perspective, because the moment that we launched this program back in December, we got some media attention on it. And unfortunately, our program was only available to people who live in the city of Long Beach. But within 24 hours of that program being available, we received over 700 inquiries from people that even lived outside of Long Beach. So we were able to see that the need for getting access to free digital inclusion resources and services during the pandemic is significantly high. So it's just a testament that we still have a lot of work to do. And I'm just super excited that we're seeing pieces of legislation and also action at the state level to help us address those issues. And so we were just so fortunate enough to be able to administer these resources and services to community members. And as you can see, everybody was just so excited and just so appreciative to receive these during the pandemic. And one of the quotes that I want to share with you was when I went to the library site of where the devices were being administered, I did meet with a Long Beach resident, and she expressed to me that before receiving her computer, she was literally doing her homework on her cell phone. And by providing her with access to this resource, she's now able to complete her homework assignments and submit them on time. So it's stories like that that just really validate the impact of how digital inclusion can really affect everyone's lives. And we're just so fortunate enough to be able to be at the forefront of this work. Next slide, please. So I have included my contact information for you guys here. So feel free to reach out to me if you guys have any questions, and I'm looking forward to future conversations. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Rebecca. That was fabulous, and such a good reminder about the importance of disaggregating data to make sure that you're really meeting and reaching all of the marginalized community members in a community. So, so important. We are now going to go to Luis Sandoval of Building Skills Partnership. As mentioned, BSP is a labor management partnership that brings together immigrant janitors and building services workers from across California. Luis, I will turn it over to you.
Well, good afternoon or good morning to everyone. Thank you, the National Skills Coalition team, and Amanda and India for inviting me today. BSP is a labor management nonprofit that represents a unique partnership among 75 responsible employers and contractors, 40 building owners, SEIU, USWW, to provide workforce development and integration training. We're at 6 different regions across the state. We're in Sacramento, Oakland, Mountain View, San Jose, LA, including at LAX, and Orange County and San Diego. Each year, we provide approximately about 5,000 trainings to property service workers. That includes janitors as well as airport workers. Again, it's around workforce development and immigrant integration. We provide programming such as digital skills training, our green janitor education program, our infectious disease certification, as well as emergency preparedness. We also do other quality of life programming, such as health and wellness programming, parent engagement, and much, much more, such as immigration and ESL classes and other related programming. Through our contributions from the industry, we are able to do this, training. That's really what grounds our organization as well as our approach to how we approach training. These are funds that are negotiated by workers and by SEIU, USWW, and we're able to provide training and engage partners and foundations to support our work. So I think that's a critical component as we're talking about labor management and as well as the way we approach training. So next slide. So even before the pandemic hit, I think property service workers made up a very vulnerable demographic, mostly immigrant with limited English proficiency, a lack of access to formal education, and for many, in low-wage industries. Workers often face multiple challenges that they must overcome. This included financial security, limited healthcare, and they often have to overcome the digital skills gap that we all know that is very real. Their work is, often, undervalued, underappreciated. So I hope, that as, we're thinking about this conversation, we're thinking about how do we bring up their voices and we lift up their experiences and also, the experiences that can shape the programmings that we do. Now more than ever, we must invest in solutions that address win-win solutions. And I think BSP is a good example of that. Our participants only want a seat at the table and an ability to access quality training. That's something that we've been finding out through this pandemic. One of the things that we've been finding out that prior to the pandemic, BSP was already working to address the short-term and long-term digital needs of workers. We had been approaching a hybrid learning model that had been integrating digital skills training and into training programs. We had been integrating this hybrid learning into vocational ESL training, as well as how to use handheld devices. We had offered traditional computer literacy classes, and we had also been looking at how do we think about integrating technology more within our current training structure. What we realized is that COVID-19 hit. That really threw, I think, disrupted the way we approached the work, and it really made us think about how do we address digital equity, as well as how do we address the issue of responding to the needs of workers through training and digital equity. So, through COVID-19, we found that, that we've been able to assess, the workers, that we've been able to provide a virtual learning environment for workers through Zoom classes. We've been offering to workers, Zoom training. We've been offering to workers, digital equipment, such as tablets. We also have a ambassador program, a digital ambassador program that connects the children of janitors or property service workers to the parents, and providing, with digital skills training. So our team quickly responded to the immediate needs of our workers. One of the training needs that we had at the time was around the infectious disease training. And how do we deliver, not only the infectious disease training, but all training through a synchronized learning environment. So through BSP's infectious disease training, it's a training that was developed out of the pandemic, that is 12 hours. It's 12 hours of curriculum. To date, we've been able to deliver this training through a synchronous or hybrid learning model to reach 800 participants throughout the state. This is, I think, a testament to our staff and just the ability to respond real quickly to the needs of workers, and also understand where learners are at. At the same time, we needed to address, how to on-ramp to all-learning environment as a long-term strategy. We wanted to make sure that we did not leave workers behind as we transitioned to online. For us, this was very, very critical. We wanted to make sure that we were intentional as to not leave any workers behind. So during the pandemic, we hired a curriculum and digital equity coordinator. Her name is Beatriz Vera, who is fabulous, and I believe she's as a participant today. She has helped BSP ground our strategy to virtual learning through a digital equity lens. For us, this was extremely important. Like, how do we ground this conversation around digital equity? Digital equity for us encompasses digital literacy, which is a skills training, access to hardware, access to internet, all critical to serving our participants. So as BSP moves forward, the digital inclusion strategy, I think we need to make sure that no workers are left behind and avoid the mistakes of leaving workers behind. For us, that's extremely important as we make an evolution to an online learning environment. The curriculum and digital equity coordinator has really helped us forge new partnerships, really looking at, what do we need? How do we make sure they will address the needs of the workers, making sure that, that as we're developing new curriculum, we're integrating and embedding digital skills training into all curriculum that we currently have. And she's been just really, really fabulous at moving the work at a statewide lens. At the same time, I think for us, we wanted to make sure that we explored how do we use other tools. So recently we've been exploring a partnership, as well as we've been exploring a learning management system to help not only facilitate how do we use, online learning platforms, but at the same time, help on-ramp students to a community college or an adult school. So that's something that we've been partnering really closely with the community college system. So I think for us, as we're thinking about how do we make sure that we integrate technology and address the issue of skills training, it's something that we've been doing very intentional. Currently, we have 41 participants that have gone through that online virtual training through just the infectious disease certification that's going to be connected to the community college course. So we're really excited about this particular initiative. And then just the only other thing I would just say that as we continue to move forward, one of our priorities is to just advocate, and continue to, to sound and uplift the voices of our, the workers that we reach to have an inclusive digital equity strategy. We want to make sure that as we continue to move forward, that we don't leave any worker behind. I think that's really central to the conversation as we move forward.
Thanks, Luis. That's such an important point about not leaving workers behind, particularly those who've really been on the front lines all the way through this pandemic. So we've shared a wealth of information with you, and thanks to my colleague India for having dropped even more links into the chat during today's discussion. We will be sending today's slides and recording out following the webinar so that folks have access to that. But we do have a nice chunk of time now for all of you to weigh in with your questions. And so I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing slide screen right now, and you'll just see our names and faces as panelists on your screen. And we'll go ahead and take questions. Feel free to drop things into the chat or to use the Q&A function to submit them. As we go ahead and move into the Q&A section, I want to just flag a couple of key elements that I hope you heard in our panelists' terrific presentation. The first is some organizations and municipalities within California have been at the leading edge nationally of trying to figure out digital skills, devices, and broadband, including for low-income and marginalized communities. But that is not even across the state. As you all know better than I do, there's really uneven access to resources and to good policy in some cases. So one of our hopes in having all of you be part of today's discussion is that you'll take some of these ideas and run with them in your own communities. There may be ways in which you're already acting on these in your own communities, and we encourage you to share those in the chat as well, so that folks can learn from each other and hear about the innovative work that each of you are considering. Rebecca, I'd like to come to you with a question first. You mentioned this in your presentation, but I think it bears some more discussion. There's oftentimes an assumption that either all tech help should be in English, or that people who don't speak English as their first language might not have any tech skills. But we know that neither one of those things are true, right? You can not speak English, but have very high level tech skills. You can speak English, or you can need tech help, but not necessarily be fluent in English yet. Talk to us about how Long Beach thought about the issue of people who are English learners and connecting them to devices and to digital inclusion. How did you think about that?
Yeah, thanks, Amanda. That's a very good question. I do want to also just uplift the fact that it definitely does take a community effort for us to be able to address those inequities that exist around language access. And we are very fortunate enough in the city of Long Beach to have a language access program that's actually housed through our Office of Equity. So as part of our Office of Equity's language access policy, we have 3 primary languages that are covered under that. So that would include Khmer for our Cambodian residents, Tagalog for our Filipino residents, and then also Spanish for those who are Spanish speaking. So through that, we are able to provide real-time interpretation and translation services for all of our city documents and resources. So whether that is a meeting that we're trying to host to get the community's input, we're able to provide a real-time interpreter that can help provide interpretation services or even translate any of our content and our material. And this is something that's very essential for us to ensuring that Long Beach residents have equitable access to information because, for example, and this is actually going to one of the questions that was raised in the chat for my section. So the city of Long Beach has one of the largest Cambodian populations outside of Cambodia. And we're very fortunate enough to have a lot of major nonprofits that serve our Cambodian residents and have also helped educate us as a city entity on how to best serve that particular population. So for us, we have uplifted the Cambodian population as a primary target audience, because they're oftentimes disproportionately affected by the digital divide, and many of their resources and services are not available in Khmer. So for example, when we're calling an internet service provider and you want to get access to low-cost internet, they oftentimes only provide Spanish, and that's as far as it goes. So we are very fortunate enough, we actually partnered with the United Cambodian Community for our Digital Inclusion Resources Hotline, which is one of our connectors, which helped get Long Beach residents connected both to low-cost resources and the free hotspots and computing devices that we administered. So through that, we were able to ensure that Long Beach residents had language access resources to be able to connect, and still ensuring that we're also striving to improve those resources as well. So it is a long haul and something that we need to continue to work on. But I do want to mention that all of this is crucial for you to be able to have partnerships with CBOs that can also help to enlighten where those inequities and challenges and barriers sit, and ensuring that everyone, regardless of what language they speak at home, can connect to digital inclusion resources and services. It should not be a barrier for you to get access to computer literacy training, to hotspots, to computers. So I'm just very fortunate enough that we have created an infrastructure here at the City of Long Beach to help serve as that connection point.
Thanks, and that's such an important point about municipalities wanting to tap community-based nonprofits and others that have really earned the trust of communities over a long period of time, and who can be really powerful in sharing that expertise and connecting people to public services that they are equitably entitled to because they are taxpayers themselves. Trish, I want to come to you. You mentioned that there's actually some pretty broad consensus around general things that the legislature, the assembly, is trying to tackle with broadband. I know there's a lot of advocates on today's call. What do elected officials need to be hearing from us right now about broadband in order to galvanize them to act? What's the most powerful notes that we should be hitting as we're reaching out to legislators?
Thank you very much for the question, Amanda. I think one of the things is that they need to be weighing in and getting their voice into the network. And there still is resistance, I will say. And you know, even though there's broad consensus among many of us, we do expect that there will be some other resistance from some providers. And so the feeling that we have overall is, if we're not going to deal with something this big now, when are we going to do it? We've got the momentum, we have the need, but I think that every community leader needs to be weighing in. They can do it individually as their jurisdictions, but also through their leadership networks like the League of California Cities or RCRC or CSAC, and they've all been working to advance these issues. And one of the things that I think it's beneficial for them to understand is that a lot of this legislation is opening up opportunity for local communities to have more control over the funding resources, access for eligibility that they have not had before. They can look at new models for controlling or owning or stimulating infrastructure investment, municipal fiber networks. We've been working with California Forward and California Emerging Technology Fund on this innovation series. And for instance, one of the examples we had was the South Bay Fiber Loop, municipal fiber loop. So there's some really creative new models coming, ways to leverage other kind of public funding sources like transportation funding or workforce funding. So we need to get everybody connected. And I just encourage them to be a very active voice in the mission. Thank you.
That's great. Thanks so much, Trish. We have a great question in the chat for Rebecca, which I'll get to in a moment. I want to encourage folks, if you have other questions, this is a great time to drop them in the chat or submit them using the Q&A function. I want to go first, though, to Luis. Luis, you talked about how workers are part of families, right? And last year we saw that a lot of school districts scrambled to try to get Chromebooks to K-12 students, and there was some awareness that maybe their parents might need some help too. You're really kind of going about it the opposite way. You engage with the parents first because they are members of the labor unions that BSP supports, and then you connect with their children. Can you talk a little bit about what does two-generation digital inclusion work look like? What should folks be thinking about as they think about the fact that workers are part of families and families are multi-generational?
Yeah, no, that's an excellent question. I mean, I think one of the things that we got to think about is what assets are within the household, right? In this case, we have, many immigrant households. We have the children, we have the parents, the working parents themselves. So if we look at it from what assets are in the home and how do we tap into those assets, I think we could develop effective strategies, right? So for BSP, we've been working directly with the workers themselves. One, through providing digital equity training, digital skills training, making sure that they're equipped to understand how to log on to Zoom, how to make sure that they're able to take courses online, making sure that we address some of the other issues that are coming out right now around how to access healthcare information online and so forth, right? So we provide just that very specific training to the parents themselves. At the same time as we're addressing some of the other issues, how to support their children, right? How to make sure that, they have the tools to support the kids through online learning. Particularly when there's a language barrier, I think it's really important that we try to do that, in a very practical way. So I think our staff has done a really good job at developing a curriculum that is based on where workers are at, as well as making sure that they feel they're supported every step of the way. At the same time, I would say we added a digital ambassador program, linking, the students, or, those high school students or college age students are in the home to support the parents, the working parents, to support their parents, and how to address some of the digital skills gaps that exist within that home, but also be the bridge maker between the parent and digital skills and their younger siblings to digital skills. So we've been providing training to these digital ambassadors, as well as providing stipends to the digital ambassadors. And I think that's a critical way that we could address both the digital equity issue, digital gap, as well as making sure that we look at what assets exist within a home.
That's great. Thanks, Luis. Rebecca, I want to come to you. We have this question about whether you followed up on the performance of the devices that folks were given to advise on future purchases. And I'm not sure whether that refers to future purchases that the city of Long Beach might make. That is, did you spend public money on devices that worked out for people, or future purchases that users themselves might make if they find that the device they were given no longer suits all of their needs because time has passed or their family's gotten bigger or what have you. Can you tackle whichever aspect of that you feel equipped to comment on?
Sure, absolutely. And you actually beat me to it. I was about to hit send and I was like, oh, we're about to talk about it right now. So perfect timing. Yeah, so we are actually in the process of getting ready to administer a survey through our nonprofit partner, Human IT. So they're the partner that gave us the devices that allowed us to connect those to Long Beach residents. So we understand that there are so many different unique stories and also circumstances that come along with people receiving the device. So I don't want to say that it's all solutions have been solved by just giving people the device and they're able to utilize it. Some people may not feel comfortable, they may feel intimidated. And the good news is that we did provide a digital literacy training course sign up in alignment with receiving the hotspots and computers, but we also understand that people have unique learning needs. So we are administering this survey. It's going to be translated in the languages that I spoke upon earlier. And the purpose of this survey is to first and foremost to understand what people have been utilizing the devices for. So initially, as part of our intake process, we did survey to see what do people primarily expect to use the free hotspots and computers for after receiving them. And most people share that they want to be able to connect with loved ones. They also want to be able to go to school. But we also understand that that may change. We're now getting ready to peak towards the summer. We're in spring. What are people utilizing those devices for now? We also want to see if any unique challenges and experiences have come up. So primarily, we administer tablets that may not be suitable for everyone. So we want to know what are some of those kinks that we could work out. And we are very fortunate enough to have received additional funding from the American Rescue Act, which Biden signed as well. So Long Beach will be allocating an additional $2 million for digital inclusion. So we want to be able to understand all of these different aspects before we do a similar program like this again over the next few months. So overall, our feedback has been positive, but we do understand that there's always areas to be able to grow and enhance the program. So we'll definitely be looking at that feedback to see, you know, how we can definitely make any, you know, changes. One thing that I can say is that we will most likely be steering away from the tablet route, just because the tablets came with keyboards, but some people may not feel comfortable always having to, you know, figure out how the keyboard works, and may feel comfortable with just opening up a Chromebook or a tablet. That's just a little bit easier. So all of those little kinks that may seem so simple to us, but make a big difference in the lives of others, we will be modifying, you know, based on the feedback that we received. So great question.
Great. And I just want to flag for all of you in different parts of the state, something really important that Rebecca just said, which is the $2 million from the American Rescue Plan. That money that's flowing down from the federal level is pretty flexible money. There's no mandate in most cases that states or localities spend it on digital inclusion. That's why your voices as advocates are so important in educating your city councils, your state officials, your workforce boards, all of those partners about why this is a wise use of that money and why it can help them accomplish goals that they have. So I'd actually like to go back to Trish now and just ask you to talk a little bit about the 4 workforce boards that have come together to make a digital inclusion investment in Valley Vision. You mentioned to me earlier that those 4 workforce boards often partner together on other projects. So the workforce boards kind of have a history of working together. Talk a little bit about the Digital Inclusion Project and how that came to be, just to sort of illustrate to folks what good can look like when workforce boards take digital inclusion seriously and connect with an organization like yours.
Well, thank you for the question, Amanda. We've had a long partnership with the workforce boards. They do work as a collective regional planning unit, so they collaborate very well. They cover a lot of different geographies and types of sub areas with industries. The region has 2.5 million people, and we cover 9 counties through that. So they invested early on in regional sector strategies, trying to look at skills gaps by sectors, and using their funding to support regional employer engagement with the community colleges so that we can build our ecosystem. So they also invested their planning dollars a few years ago into research about the future of work and the coming impacts of automation. So when that Brookings report came out that I mentioned, that really catalyzed them to focus more on kind of the enabling pieces of how people can get skills building. And so when we started reconvening the Sacramento Coalition for Digital Inclusion, they started participating more broadly. It was focused at first on Sacramento City and County. So because of the long-term partnership, and now we have an official role for the boards as their regional organizer to work on regional alignment. So with the increase in how important digital skills are, and digital access and equity, devices, et cetera, affordability, they really came together to invest in expanding the coalition across the full region. So that just started this month, and it is where we have a new action plan that we're launching that covers these areas. So really we don't have as much information as we want either on the digital skills more by the industry sectors. So that's why we're very happy to work with you on that, but really focused on the continuum of digital literacy and that platform to digital skills. So I think they're very forward looking in how they invest.
That's great. Thank you so much.
And Amanda, I just say to that for our other listeners, I think reaching out to your boards and seeing can they invest in these strategies is really, it's a strong partnership if that can happen.
And you can always get their competitive juices flowing by pointing out that other California workforce boards are ahead of them.
Yeah.
Sometimes that helps, sometimes it doesn't. Yeah. We have 1 minute left. I want to go to you, Luis, for a quick minute, and then I'm going to turn things over to Anna to close us out. So Trish just started to touch on this, but we know from research done here at National Skills Coalition that in addition to kind of foundational digital skills, people also need occupational digital skills. And employers are such an important part of understanding what skills people realistically need, not the ones that are listed on some list somewhere, but which ones hiring managers actually care about. Can you talk very briefly about BSP and how you bring in employer voice to weigh in on the kinds of skills that people need to develop?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for the question. I think for us, we really center our conversation on making sure that we get the input from employers, making sure that we're addressing the needs of employers. So throughout the state, we have labor management committees where we bring together employers to have a conversation about what are the training needs, where's the industry is going, and how do we meet those needs within the industry. We also have a statewide convening of labor management where we have both the employer voice as well as labor. And at the same time, I think it's important that we recognize the value that workers have and make sure that we allow the space for worker voice. So we also do that. We have a system in place to allow for that worker voice to shape where we go as an organization, but also our programming and make sure that we address the needs. One thing that I'm just going to say briefly is I think as we're coming out of this pandemic, I think it's really important that there's been a lot of conversation about when are we going to go back to normal. And I think when we're thinking about digital equity and skills gap, and so I think we really got to think about this as an opportunity for us to really rethink about and reimagine how do we re-engage with disenfranchised communities and disenfranchised workers, right, and the most vulnerable. And what I've been advocating for is that this is really a time to double down, look at our investments, and making sure that we address those gaps, right, and not really go back to the normal, but really think about how to reimagine a new way to re-engage with these workers. So,
thanks, Luis. Anna, over to you and California Edge, such a great partner of ours in this Skills for California work.
Thank you, Amanda, and a big thank you to our panelists for providing us with the insight and expertise on all things broadband and digital inclusion. Again, my name is Ana Alvarado, Policy Director for the California Edge Coalition. And just to wrap up today's webinar, we would like to urge everyone to please sign on to our call to action letter, urging Governor Newsom and the legislature to pass a broadband for all package in this year's legislative session. The link to the sign-on letter is in the chat box for you all to access. Sign-ons for the letter are due by May 6th, close of business day. And if you have any questions, our contact information is also on that Google form. And again, very critical that we keep the momentum going and urge our state leaders to make the necessary investments to address the digital divide and ensure that digital skills training is also part of the ongoing conversation. And with that, if there are no additional comments from my colleagues here, I don't see none. Thank you all for joining us today and have a great rest of your day.